And yeah, so the way I think to go about this topic is so I read the Reddit post that you had posted, right? And so that seemed like a really good way to get into it for someone like me who isn't much acquainted with ethics in general, right? And so you seem to have mentioned Kantianism, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics as being the three sort of main theories. So could you speak a little bit about what that is?
Absolutely. That post was they asked me to talk about Kantian ethics, and I have a hard time explaining Kantian ethics without contrasting it with its two alternatives, right?
Right.
So, in contemporary ethics today, we have three main competitors for the correct moral theory. I'm not sure which one to start with. Let's start with utilitarianism, sometimes called consequentialism. And so the utilitarian wants to say, the argument is happiness is good, suffering is bad. Alternatively, satisfied preferences is good, unsatisfied preferences are bad. But one of those two things. And given that those are the good and bad things in the world, the right and wrong thing to do is to maximize good in the world and minimize bad. So you should do whatever, when you have a set of options in front of you, you should do whichever of those options maximizes good, happiness, and minimizes bad. Not just your bad, not just maximizing your happiness and minimizing your suffering, but like adding to the good of the universe, right? So I want to make sure that I'm doing things that add the most good to the world and eliminate the most bad. So for example, if I have shoes and they're perfectly serviceable, I can wear them. I mean, maybe they're out of style. Maybe I'm tired of them. Maybe they smell a little bad and they look kind of scuffed up, but they work, right? I don't need to spend money on new shoes. That money would bring me a little bit of happiness. Maybe I'd be like, I probably wouldn't even, I would stop being annoyed by how I look with my scuffed up old shoes that smell slightly bad. But that's a small bit of suffering. Whereas the money I'd be spending on new shoes, I could donate that to Oxfam or any sort of charity you want to pick. And it seems like that money would go a lot further into adding happiness to the universe and reducing suffering. So, utilitarianism is going to put a lot of pressure on you to spend a lot of time, doing charity, making sacrifices. Not to say that, we all fall short of whatever the true moral theory is. I think sometimes people have the false impression is if they think a certain moral theory is true, they have to live by it. Obviously, that's not the case. We're all terrible people. We're all human. We all fail in all sorts of ways. It's just, what is the correct standard by which I'm to be measured by, and that I'm failing when I fail? And if you're a utilitarian, you say, I should be giving a lot more to charity and not buying these shoes. I'll try to do better. Maybe it puts pressure on you to do better. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live up to it. So that's utilitarianism. Okay, and then we have virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, in some ways, is the youngest and the oldest of the moral theories, because basically every ancient Greek was a virtue ethicist. There was no other ethical theory. They were all different versions of virtue ethicists. If you were a Greek or a Roman, it was just like, what form of virtue ethics is right? But then it kind of goes away for a long time, and then it only comes back in the mid 1950s, and it comes back with a vengeance, right? So now it's one of the one of the major competitors for the correct moral theory. And on this theory, if you think about, how to put this, one objection that the virtue ethicist is going to have to the utilitarian is that the utilitarian has oversimplified ethics, right? For one thing, they said there's only one good and one bad, right? The good is happiness, the bad is suffering. So the reason art is good is for the utilitarian is that it makes you happy. The reason honesty is good is because lying tends to, cause suffering. the reason courage is good because it helps you help other people and be courageous and fight fire. So everything reduces to this one value for the utilitarian of happiness and suffering. The virtue ethicist thinks that there's a whole zoo of different values. Beauty is valuable, happiness is valuable, courage is valuable, friendship, loyalty, all these things, and they're not reducible to each other. So if you get into a situation with a dying friend who asks you to tell them the truth about whether you know that their significant other has been cheating on them and they're about to die, and they ask you, tell me the truth, did my significant other cheat on me? There's the value of loyalty and honesty, that seems, or honesty that goes one direction, and the value of benevolence, right, not causing him unnecessary suffering, that goes in the other direction. And that's a real dilemma for the virtue ethicist. For the utilitarian, it's not a dilemma, right? Honesty is only valuable because it tends to promote happiness. If it's not going to promote happiness, you should just lie. So in this case, the utilitarian would be like, yeah, just tell them why. The virtue ethicist thinks, there's a real pull in both directions. And there's a problem for the virtue ethicist then, right? Because whereas the utilitarian has just one value, happiness is good, suffering is bad, you can just say maximize happiness, minimize suffering. So you can give a formula for how to calculate what to do, because there's just make this thing as much as possible, make that as little as possible. But when you have a lot of different values, you can have them pulling in different directions, and you don't have a common currency to rate them against, to price them against each other and decide how much is one worth versus the other. And the virtue ethicists usually think that there is a right answer. It's just that there is no formula for it. It requires a skill or a maturity. So for example, I like to use, there's a lot of examples you can use here. One is like flirting, right? So take some really awkward 16-year-old boy who's really shy and terrible and has all sorts of weird views about women and thinks of this and has a really bad sense of humor and always says the wrong thing. And you're like, all right, I'm going to write him a list of rules that makes him good on a date, that teaches him how to flirt. You're not going to be able to do it, right? Flirting is a skill. You have to be able to read the other person. You have to have the right gut instincts. You have to have the right thoughts pop into your head. You have to be able to be witty and play off of what they say. You have to have the right sense of humor. You have to be able to tell what's going to make the situation more awkward and what's going to eliminate the awkwardness, what's overstepping your bounds. Anyway, all of those things. And so that's a skill that comes with time, with trial and error and practice, but eventually you get good at it, or you may get good at it. Some people never do, right? But if you're lucky, you eventually get the skill and you get good at it. And the virtue ethicist wants to say that ethics, living a good life, being a good human being, is like that. It's a skill that takes, knowing friendship is this really difficult dance. Your friends might be asking too much of you, but you want to help. You want to be a good friend and help them, but at some point you have to stand up for yourself and your own self-respect and say, well, you're asking too much of me. You're using me as a doormat. But where is that line, right? And it's really from screwing up some friendships, being screwed over by friends, overstepping your bounds. Eventually you start to be mature and become good at running a friendship. And so virtue ethicist wants to say, ethics is about being a good human being, living human life well. And that requires a skill, there's no rule that tells you how to do it. What is it to live human life well? Well, the virtue ethicist thinks things like there's all these values in the world, and you have to navigate the world, and being a good human being is to be able to bring in all this information and weigh it correctly, and then make the right judgments about what to do, I guess is one way to put it. All right. Well, one more thing about virtue ethics before I move on. They tend to have this sort of aspect of, so if you think about a good wolf is one that's fleet of foot and hunts well, and it's not antisocial because a wolf is a pack animal, right? He's got to get along with the pack. He's also got to hunt well. He's got to have a good nose to smell. So, if it's slow or antisocial, it's a defective wolf, right? It's a bad wolf. It's a bad instance of its kind. It's not, it's not living a good wolf's life. I mean, it might be happy. It might you might end up in a zoo and someone's feeding it, but it's not, succeeding as a wolf. It's not living a wolf's life. A tortoise, on the other hand, can be super slow. A tortoise can be antisocial. I assume that tortoises are not social animals, but maybe I'm wrong about that. So the standards for a tortoise are different about what makes a successful tortoise. And similarly, the virtue ethicist kind of wants to apply that same way of thinking about human beings, like what makes a good human being. So if you imagine like a nature documentary about a wolf, right? A wolves, they work in social groups and they hunt, and the alpha leader does this. And you talk about the way in which wolves in general as a species, as like an abstract concept, thrive. You can do the same thing for a tortoise. Now imagine that for a human being, right? Human beings are social animals, and they need to smooth over awkwardness with their boss and convince people to be their friends. I don't know, whatever you want to say, right? But the point being here is that there's some idea that ethics is about being a good instance of your kind. You're a human being. Human beings in particular use their reason to make judgments, and that involves being able to have this mature ability to bring in information, weigh it correctly, and then make correct judgments, which involves no rule, like the utilitarian gives you a rule, but instead a skill. Great. Now we can get to Kantian ethics. I'll stop right for a second before I get to Kantian ethics if you wanted to interrupt, because I've been...
Yeah, so that sounded to me, the last part about being the best kind of a human, that sounds a whole lot like essentialism, right? So it talks about that human beings have a certain essence, and you satisfy that essence. You live a good human life only if you satisfy that essence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I saw that you had an earlier episode on existentialism, and I think that I and Kantians in general share the same critique of virtue ethics as the existentialists do, is that we have no essential nature. I don't have to be a good human being. Okay, human beings are social animals. What do I care about that, right? I can be I'm not failing myself for my own. I can choose to be a hermit. I mean, as long as I'm living up to my own standards, my own choices, the sort of person I'm choosing to be, well, we'll talk about that when we get to Kant, but, asterisks, then who is the virtue ethicist to come along and say, well, you're not a good instance of your kind? So I think that, antisocial hermits who fail on all sorts of ways of being a human being are perfectly good, successful people, as long as that they're following, they're living up to the life that they've chosen for themselves. It seems like, so if you imagine, Rawls has this example of a very talented young woman. I think she's like she's an incredible talent for playing the violin or something. But really all she wants to do is count blades of grass. That's like her own, like, all I want to do in life is count blades of grass. I just want to I want to count all the blades of grass on my lawn and then start over and do it again. That's my whole ambition in life. The virtue ethicist is going to say, maybe they're going to say that's not a life fit for a human being. You're not going to mature the sort of skills that are necessary to human life, like sociality and being able to flirt and be a good friend. Like, she's going to be incredibly immature, right? Like, if you actually put her in any social circumstance, she would be a total train wreck. But just assume that she, I don't know, she's really rich. She's got a bunch of money. So she buys a plot of land and she pays some people to keep people away and just bring her food, and she counts blades of grass all day. So she's like a really screwed up human being that would be a total disaster living human life. But who cares? This is the life that she's chosen for herself. I don't see why the virtue ethicist is able to constrain, tell free wills what sort of life to live. And I think the existentialist has a similar critique of the sort of essentialism that the virtue ethicist has.
Right, yeah. So let's talk about Kantianism then.
Good. All right. So where does the, I mean, just to, I guess, use this as my way into Kantianism, where does the Kantian part ways with the existentialist? Well, the existentialist seems to think you have a free will. Essentialism is false. You make your own, like you make your own standards. You choose what sort of life you're going to live, and you only can, fail or succeed your own. You can only fail yourself, right? You choose the sort of person you want to be and your standards and what sort of life you want to live or you choose to live. And who cares what the virtue ethicist says you should be living? And also, why is it that I'm supposed to think happiness is valuable and stuff? Where's the utilitarian? Utilitarian tells me that happiness is good and suffering is bad, but okay, like what's the argument that shares aren't good? And that's the thing we should be maximizing. I think utilitarianism has this intuitive obviousness to it, right? I've experienced happiness. And so if I had to make a guess about what was good in the universe, I might say like probably pleasure. So like, that might be a point in the favor of the utilitarians. But I don't know if I find that argument convincing. I still think that it's not clear to me that there's any sort of constraint on my free will coming from the utilitarian or from the virtue ethicist. But I do think that there is kind of a constraint on my free will, sort of. I mean, it's like, so let's take procrastination, right? I don't think you can choose to procrastinate. I don't think that that's a limitation on you. No one's telling you can't procrastinate. I just think it's a logical impossibility, right? Procrastination is something that happens to you. You decide to do something and then you fail and then you're procrastinating. So you can procrastinate, but it's not something you can choose to do. Procrastinating is something that happens to you while you're choosing to do other things. And similarly, I think the Kantian wants to say that there's a lot of things which are actually not optional choice, not available choices for a free will. Procrastination is one of the things that's not an available choice for a free will. But also a lot of stuff that we traditionally think of as moral prohibitions, lying, cheating, stealing, murder, rape. So for the Kantian, the argument is going to be in the same way that the logic of what a free decision maker is rules out procrastination as an available choice. It also rules out these other things as available choices. Now, how does that work? There's a couple ways to try making that work, but let me come back to that real quick. But let me just give you but ultimately, so that's sort of like, how do you prove Kantian ethics? And like the Kantian goal is to prove to you in the same way that he can prove to you that procrastination is something that your free will can't freely choose, that lying is something that your free will can't freely choose. And so when you lie, it's an instance of your free will, you being tempted away, or your will being overridden by the desire of the moment, just like procrastination tempts you away and override. So procrastination is not an example. When you procrastinate, no one has ever procrastinated freely, right? No one's chosen to procrastinate. It's every instance of procrastination is someone's will being overridden by temptation and wants of the moment. And what the Kantian is trying to argue is the same thing is true of lying, cheating, stealing, etc. All right, we can talk about the proof of how the Kantians try to prove that, or Kantians like me. But let's talk about what ethical theory, what sort of rule you get in the end if you do prove Kantian ethics. Just like the utilitarian, you do get a rule. So the virtue ethicist is going to complain that the Kantian is saying that there's a rule and there's not really a rule to ethics. But the rule is very different. So the utilitarian gives you a goal. It says happiness is good, suffering is bad. So you need to subjugate everything you do and try to make sure that it's maximizing this thing. So if you were going to be an ornithologist or a pro Halo player, or I don't know, count blades of grass for your career, you should quit that. You should go into charity work, or really you should go work on Wall Street, make a gazillion dollars, and then donate 90% of your income to charity, right? You need to guide all of your life decisions on how it's producing this result, contributing to this moral goal, this moral purpose of making the universe have as much happiness, as much goodness, and eliminating suffering. The Kantian moral rule is, 180 degrees the other direction. It's not about, there is no goal. Morality is not about a purpose. It's not telling you what to do. It's not telling you what goal to have. There's side constraints, right? So what the Kantian argument ends up producing is choose however you want to live your life, right? Go be a pro Halo player. Go count blades of grass. Go do whatever you want. But you can't do that logically consistently because of, just like procrastination is something you can't choose. If in a way that involves lying, cheating, stealing, specifically using somebody else, right? There's two ways of putting this. One is I can pursue whatever choice I want to make, but I can't do it according to the Kantian without contradicting myself and the value I place on my own will. If I am treating other people as just mere tools to be used for my purposes, right? So one way to put the Kantian rule is to not use other people, right? So I don't have to donate to charity. Some Kantians try to put an argument that Kantians do need to donate to charity, but the simple version of it would be, you don't have to donate to charity. I'm not using the starving people, someone who's starving in an earthquake-stricken country, if I don't donate to them. So I'm not violating any ethical rule. Now, if I rob my neighbor to get money to buy an Xbox, I am disrespecting their choices. I am treating their will as unimportant and involving them in my plot to buy an Xbox when they don't want to be involved in it. Whereas, I'm not involving the person who's starving at this earthquake-stricken country. I'm not even involved. I'm not, dealing with them at all. Okay, so that's one way to put it. Don't use people. Don't treat people like tools. The other way to put it is kind of like not to have a double standard, not to be a parasite. So only act in ways that only act according to principles which everybody could act upon, and you would be successful. Here's just to give a technical statement of it. Only perform an action for a goal if that type of action could be the universal way of accomplishing that type of goal in relevantly similar circumstances, which is my favorite way of putting Kant's formula of universal law. So this is supposed to be equivalent to the not using people rule. But the idea here is, let's just talk about cutting a line, why this would rule out cutting in line. Say I want to get something quicker. I'm standing at the ATM. I really want to get my money quick. So the goal I have is to get my money quicker. The action I'm thinking about doing is to cut in line to get it. Could cutting in line be a universal way of getting something quicker in relevantly similar circumstances to mine? No, right? Because then there would be no line to cut in front of, right? I'm being a parasite on other people operating according to different policies, right? I need them to think, oh no, cutting in line is not a good reason, or wanting something quicker is not a good reason to cut in line. And so they stand in line, and then I operate according to different rules and I cut, right? It can't work as a reason for everybody. And one way to argue for Kantianism is that reasons are the same for everybody. You don't have special reasons. So if you're operating according to reason, you're operating according to a reason that should work for everybody. And so if it doesn't, if you think about it, what if everybody had this reason in the same circumstances and it wouldn't work? Then it's not a reason. That's one way to put the argument. But yeah, so what it ends up doing is, I think in some ways Kantian ethics is a lot more lax than utilitarianism, because the utilitarian is telling everybody to quit their jobs, quit what they're doing, and take on whatever career would help them help the most people. So it doesn't matter if you don't like people and don't want to work at a charity and you really love studying bugs, you should quit that job and you should force yourself to go, help at a charity, because that's what maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering. The best thing you can do to contribute to happiness in the world. The Kantian doesn't, it's lax in the sense it's like, I'm not telling you how to live your life, you do you. But the Kantian is a little bit more strict, because you're not allowed, you're not allowed to cut in line, but it kind of seems well, here's the way to put it. You have these side constraints, but these side constraints are super strict, right? And so there's a lot of objections, maybe ones you'll raise about, how can the Kantian be so strict about it? Maybe they have less rules, maybe they're only side constraints, but they're not flexible about them at all. The utilitarian says, well, don't lie. Why? Because usually when you lie, you're doing it to make yourself happy, but it's coming at the cost of unhappiness for a bunch of other people, or you're taking this huge risk that you'll be found out and it's going to cause a bunch of, the right decision to try best maximizing happiness for the most part, usually is a policy of honesty. But if telling a lie would save a million lives, definitely do that, right? The utilitarian would definitely do that. It's not clear. I mean, the Kantian prohibition on lying, you're not respecting the person you're talking to, right? You're using them, you're telling them words just to get what you want, right? So it seems like you're violating the don't use people, don't treat people as just objects to get around and manipulate for your purposes form of way of putting the Kantian rule. You're also not obeying the only operate according to universal policies version of Kantianism, because a lie only works because you're taking advantage of trust. And if everybody was saying falsehoods whenever they wanted something, there'd be no trust to take advantage of. So it seems like a lie, is prohibited by the Kantian rules. And so what happens if happens in a scenario where a lie could save a million lives? It seems like the Kantian's going to say you can't tell that lie, right? So it's a lot more lax in the sense that, they're only these side constraints. They're actually pretty small, right? Don't lie, cheat, steal, but go do what you want. I think I can pursue my life pretty well without having to do those things, to resort to those things. But on the other hand, some of the objections to Kantian ethics is people find it really absurd that the Kantians don't like that the Kantian is committed to these side constraints being what do I want to say here? Unvariant, unviolable, unviolatable, just like really strict, right? It doesn't matter what the consequences are going to happen. Like you can't violate the side constraints.
Yeah. And so the example about lying, that reminds me about, so while researching, I came across this example quite a few times about if you have a friend at home and someone's at your door trying to murder them, they ask you, where is your friend? And so a Kantian would say that you should not lie to them, because then you agree to the fact that lying is okay in certain situation, in every situation which is similar to this one. And so that is the example that this reminds me of. And as you said, it sounds a little too strict, as you said, when it comes to pursuing ethics. What seems to be a little more correct to me is the idea of virtue ethics, which says that it is not possible to boil it down to maybe one rule, or bring it down to reduce it to such a level, and every situation needs to be taken and assessed individually.
I mean, perhaps. I mean, for the virtue ethics, sometimes a lot of times people find it very attractive because they can make it tell them whatever they want it to tell. Like, oh, this is really counterintuitive, so I'm sure the values work out. So, one worry to have about virtue ethics, I mean, this is one way to put the objection, is just like, is it a moral theory at all? They didn't even give us any. What does the virtue ethicist say about abortion? What does the virtue ethicist say about the murder at the door case? They say, well, if you're a mature, experienced person with good judgment, you'll be able to make the right call. Okay, right? I get it, right? That's the whole point, is that there isn't, you have to have the skill. If you have the skill, you can make the right judgment. If you don't have the skill, you can't. So there's not, but there is something that bothers me about the squishiness here, and you can press them on whether this, whether they can get away with not giving answers. But as far as the Kantian, right? So the Kantian, this is an interesting case. The example comes from somebody wrote Kant a letter, when he was alive, giving him this thought experiment, and he wrote back. He's like, "Yeah, you can't tell a lie. Don't do it." And it's unclear whether maybe Kant was being a little flippant. Maybe he was. Maybe he's being totally serious, but he might have also been like, I think there was somebody at least once I read who's saying, I read that correspondence and it really seemed like the guy was trying to come up with excuses to do wrong. Like he was like looking for any sort of like kind of, what if, this sort of thing. So I can tell, like, to sort of open a crack in the door so then he could tell lies to his sister or his girlfriend about cheating on her or something. So Kant was just like, no, you can't do it. Stop trying to come up with these stupid, scenarios so you can justify yourself lying to your boss or whatever. But actually, I think that this is a really good objection to the Kantian theory, because I think that it really does face this problem. I think it's let me give you an example. There's a philosopher named Michael Sandel who's not a Kantian. He says what the Kantian should say is that half-truths are okay, because you're kind of respecting you're at least respecting them enough to tell a half-truth instead of a total. I find that very bizarre for a number of reasons. Like, what if the half-truth's not going to work? Then I tell the half-truth and my friend gets killed, but like a half-truth's okay, but not a total lie, even though it's not going to work. I don't know. There's a philosopher named Christine Korsgaard at Harvard who is a Kantian who I've had the pleasure of studying with, and who is really, really great, and who a lot of my work is inspired by or about. And her answer I also don't think works, but it's interesting, and it's also kind of revealing about how the Kantian theory is supposed to work. She says, listen, let's say that someone comes to your door and they're in a costume, or they're lying to you, right? They're saying, hey, I'm looking for your friend. I'm here with a check for $1 million to give him, right? Or I've got his mail or something, right? But they're lying, right? Because the whole scenario is, should I lie to this person who's coming to kill my friend? Well, say that she says, presumably they're lying to you because they don't expect you to tell the truth if they say I'm here to murder your friend. So they have some sort of deception, but you see through it. And you can tell them straight to their face, if you were here to kill my friend, I would, and I knew that, I would lie to you. And what would they say? They're like, well, good thing I'm not that. Good thing I'm here just to give him this check, right? You can put the sign on so the claim here is lying to liars actually is a universalizable print. Like lying to a liar who doesn't know that he's a liar actually would work, right? So a lie in this scenario seems like it would be I think that's right, that lying to a liar does pass the Kantian test, at least for the universal law version. It might not pass the respecting not using people, because I am sort of just saying things so that there's an interesting way in which Kant thinks that these are the same rule and just two ways of saying the same thing, but there's lots of cases where they seem to not say the same thing. And so Kantians have to either choose one or the other, or you have to explain how they actually do come to be the same thing. Or what Korsgaard does is she has like one always applies and the other one turns on or off depending on whether you're dealing with immoral people. But there is this like kind of weird way in which Kantians have two ways of putting their fundamental rule, and it's not clear that they always line up with each other. So you can lie to liars, at least according to the universal law version of the Kantian rule. And there's something poetic about that. If you tell a lie, you remove yourself from the protections of not being lied to. But the problem is, I don't think it's always the case that the murderer would come to the door lying, right? You can imagine the Nazi just showing up in full Nazi regalia saying, are you hiding any Jews, right? And like, there's no, like, then the whole, like, you can lie to liars thing doesn't help. What do I say there? I think that this is a very difficult question. It's not something I particularly work on. It's possible that as a Kantian, I have to bite the bullet and just say, yeah, you can't lie in this case. I think Kant himself was really eager to bite this bullet because it allowed him to, so his argument for the existence of God was a little bit weird. It was not that we need God for morality to exist. It's that morality exists, but we are psychologically weak. And so we need God as like a psychological crux to make us do what we know we have. Like, so morally, we have to tell this guy the truth and tell him where our friend is. But man, that's really hard to cycle. Like, there's just no way you could bring yourself to do that unless you believe that heaven exists and that God's going to punish the bad and give your friend a, afterlife. So Kant thinks that, he's proven morality. I think that that's correct, because I think Kant's, I'm a Kantian. I think Kant's proofs for morality work. But then there's this weird way in which he uses morality to try. Usually it goes the other direction. People think, well, we need God to prove morality. Kant tries to prove morality independent of God, and then show that, he welcomes all of these counterintuitive results to show how hard it is to live up to morality's rules, and then he can justify belief in God as a psychological crux to living up to these incredibly difficult demands of morality. What I would say about the murder at the door, here's my I'm trying to think about like what the last time I thought about this, what my shot in the dark or my gut feeling was. I think there's something weird going on about the way in which the murderer at the door, or the Nazi at the door in this case, is using you, right? He's taking advantage of your honesty. He's involving you in his attempt to, you don't want to be a part of this, right? I'm not sure if there's a way out of this using the formula of universal law, but at least for the stuff about not using people version, it's really about treating all free wills, including your own, right? Respecting it and the value of the things that it chooses for itself. And it doesn't seem like you're doing that if you're letting yourself be used in that way. I'm not sure if there's I guess I don't have a good answer, but I think that maybe there's something to if I had to guess, if I were to sit down and try to think through this, my first hypothesis that might turn out to be totally wrong would be, let me think about and investigate and see if anyone's written about the possibility that there's some way around this for the Kantian, because of the way in which that person is basically, using you and not respecting your free will, and you have some sort of obligation to stand up for yourself, or self-defense, defending yourself against, having this wrong done to you of being used in this way to kill your friend.
Right. And so if I were to think about that myself, so from a very naive point of view, as someone who has not studied about this for a long time, if you were to ask me, would you lie? I'd say no. But if you ask me, should you lie to a murderer? I'd say yes. And so what comes to my mind is that the motive of the person in front of me is also an immoral act, which would then allow me to commit an immoral act myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the sort of response that Korsgaard kind of tries making with her, like, you can lie to liars. It just seems like it doesn't actually get her all the way, because it doesn't help her with the Nazi case. I mean, I think you're right that, again, that's a good hypothesis. It's a good thought for further research or to try writing a paper and investigating. Yeah, it kind of seems like maybe if I'm dealing with bad, like an immoral person, the rules somehow modify, but you have to try fleshing that out and saying exactly how do the rules modify? Why do they modify? And Korsgaard offers that, but it only gets you out of when the person's lying at the door. It doesn't get you out of the Nazi at the door. And so it doesn't seem like it helps with the non-lying murderer at the door. So you would need to like give a similar account to Korsgaard's, where she calls it ideal and non-ideal theory. She thinks that there's a certain moral standard that applies when you're in ideal circumstances, everybody's behaving morally. And when you're dealing with not in a non-ideal case where you're dealing with immoral people, the rules change, they weaken. She thinks that the formula of humanity, the not using people part, turns off, but the universal law one still stays. And you should obey the formula of universal law one, but try to get back to the ideal circumstance, and then you have kind of the goal to like get things back to the ideal situation where you can obey both. I don't know how I feel. I mean, and she's inspired by Rawls, who says, I think Rawls is the one who originated this stuff about ideal and non-ideal theory. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you said like, here's my naive like speculation of what you would think. I'm like, yeah, that's not naive. It's a perfectly good shot in the dark. And then you have to like sit down and try to make it work. It seems like Korsgaard had the same thought, and she tried to make it work, and then it only got her out of the liar at the door, and maybe not the not. I mean, actually, to tell you the truth, I bet you that she would have an explanation for the non-lying Nazi at the door. It's just I'm not sure what it
makes sense.
What it would be. One other thing I would say though is that I mean, I'm probably unique in this, or maybe I'm not unique, but this is probably an unpopular sort of belief among philosophers, is that I tend to think that ethics is going to force us into some uncomfortable truths, right? If your ethical theory is just telling you that all of your intuitions and everything you thought was moral and morality worked exactly as you thought it did before you sat down and proved it and worked out the details, then you probably just rationalized and came up with a theory that tells you what you want to hear, right? So I'm assuming that there's going to be some really counterintuitive consequences. Personally, I would lie to the murderer at the door. I would lie to the Nazi at the door, right? Without hesitation. So I think Kant's right, but man, I couldn't. I mean, just like Kant said, I would need to believe in God in order to convince myself to lie to this Nazi and believe that God will take care of the person he kills, or save them or something. And on top of that, I really think that that's the right. I really think that that's the right decision. I don't see how I think that but when I sit down theoretically and try to think about what moral theory is true and like which one has a convincing proof and which ones don't, I'm convinced by the Kantian argument. So either it turns out like that I should be lying, I should be telling the truth to the Nazi at the door, or we don't understand Kantian theory enough yet, and at some point someone will work out how you are justified in lying to the Nazi at the door. But in general, I assume that there's going to be some stuff that I thought was immoral or moral, which will turn out to be the other way around.
Right. Yeah. So you took this sort of a step back to look at the entire picture about ethical theory, revealing some. And so I was thinking about this, and I had decided not to talk about it because I don't have a well-developed thought as of yet, but let's just do it. So the thought that I have about the entire way of thinking about morality, it seems to me that, so this is I think a Christopher Hitchens example. He argues about
sorry, who's example?
Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher Hitchens, yeah.
Yeah, so some argument about if no God, how do you explain morality? And so he says something like, if I were to tell you that God doesn't exist, if it was to be proven completely, even then, none of you would go out on the streets murdering and thieving and doing horrible stuff. And so what it seems like is the morality is in a way inherently there, and what we are trying to do through while thinking about it is trying to find an explanation about about what it is and how it has evolved, right? So what I mean is, you're not formulating laws, you're not writing down and inventing laws and then saying that follow these laws and that is the absolute moral truth, because that sounds that I don't think is plausible, right? Because it seems to me that moral laws or ethics are very much subjective, right? And so they change through time, through location.
Well, whoa. Okay, hold on. Well, wait. Let's revisit that in a second. But let's stop with let's talk about the God thing and then we'll move to the subjective thing. But just, I mean, I think you're right. Like morality doesn't. So all of these moral systems, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, Kantian ethics, are compatible with God, right? But they also don't depend on God, right? The utilitarian has arguments that happiness is good and suffering is bad. That has nothing to do with God. Now, what John Stuart Mill, one of the first utilitarians, probably the most prominent one, said is that, God created happiness and he created suffering. So he created good and bad, but happiness is good and suffering is bad. And also he decided that these actions cause happiness and these actions cause suffering, and he arranged things so you can, and he wants us to be happy. This is what, so God's a utilitarian is what Mill would say. If you're a virtue ethicist, you can say, I always like to say, like, oh yeah, God sent down, or if you're a Christian, Jesus to give us an example of the most virtuous, perfect human being that we should aspire to live up to be, right? You know, you can, I don't know if you could, but there's plenty of virtue ethical Christians. And then Kant himself was religious, and he thought again, his proof of his moral theory, I mean, there's a couple ways of putting it. I mean, here's one way to put the formula of universal law proof. It's something like, I make choices to become a firefighter, to become a professional Halo player, to get in shape, to get my degree, whatever, right? To save money and buy a Camaro. And these are choices that before I made them were totally valueless, right? And I didn't come to some proof that proved to me that they are valuable. I bestowed them value. I said, I'm going to become a firefighter. And then I didn't just lay in bed and be like, okay, well, I just said those words, or somebody said, like, somebody commanded me to be a firefighter. I mean, it was me, but like somebody commanded me to be a firefighter, but who cares about what that, I mean, I'm not treating myself like a stranger on the street who yells, hey, become a firefighter. Like, I listen to myself. I say, I've decided to become a firefighter, and that motivates me to get up, get out of bed, do a lot of hard work to do it, to stick through it when I want to quit, to get up early, get up early in the morning when I don't want to get up. And so I'm treating my decisions, I'm treating my willpower as this source of value, as having the power to make things important to do, important for me to accomplish just because I've chosen them. And one way to make the argument for the Kantian is to say that I think that this is not necessarily the best argument. I think it fails but this, I mean, like, you have to do a lot of more, it gets a lot more complicated if it's going to work, but here's the simple version. You can't treat your own will and yourself to have that power without thinking that other people have that power, right? It's sort of like saying, I have the right to vote here at this precinct. Why? Well, because I'm a native-born American citizen and I live in this district. And then someone says, can I vote here? And I go, no. But I'm a native-born American citizen and I live in this district. You're like, no. Only, like, I have those traits, and that gives me the right and the power to have, like, the power to have the normative power, the authority, the right to be able to vote here. Not you, though. Like, it somehow it works. It gives me the power, but not you the power. And so one way to make the Kantian argument is to say, if I'm treating myself as having this power because, and Kant thinks that we treat ourselves to have that power because it's a free decision, because I think it's important. The reason I respect my choice is because it is a free choice and it is not forced upon me, and it's one that I get to pick. This sort of so it's sort of this existentialist thing is that, free will is super important. You should take responsibility for your choices. You should see your choices as your own, and you should really value your own free will and your own, authentic choices, and really try to choose and recognize the fact that your values are your own. But add to that, you can't do that for yourself without also logically committing yourself to seeing other people having that same choice-making power, authority for their own lives. And so you can lead your life however you choose, but as soon as you start infringing on, start bumping up against other people doing the same thing, now there's an issue of, how do I interact with them in a way that both respects my, I'm getting up out of bed, I'm interacting with them because I value myself and my free choices, which commits me to seeing their choices valuable too. So how do I make choices that can intermesh with theirs and not treat them with disrespect, not treat them as, them as worthless, but my choices as valuable. So that's one way to make the Kantian argument. Doesn't involve God at all, right? The claim is to be logically consistent, right? Anybody who acts, anybody who makes a free decision, says, I'm going to do this, takes something that was totally not valuable before, and then says, I'm going to do it, and now is motivated to get out of bed and do things to accomplish it, they're taking themselves as valuable, and they're taking their choices as worthwhile accomplishing just because they freely chose it. And that commits them to the value of other people. And the claim is that they are contradicting the value they place on themselves and the value that's required for them to carry out their own decisions when they treat other people in this exact same state as totally worthless, and as if they can just be ignored and overridden. And so, yeah, you can add God to that. I mean, Kant thinks that, God created, when the Bible says God created, I think Kant was a Lutheran, when God created man in his own image, he didn't mean that he created God with two gangly arms. God has two gangly arms, so he gave man two gangly arms and like 10 toes, right? He means that he gave mankind free will, like this incredibly valuable thing, free choice. And you're most like God when you are valuing your free will, making choices and carrying them out in ways that, when you're acting ethically. And so the claim here is that that thing that we are, that ability to be free from our desires of the moment, to not be just pushed around by my strongest impulse like a dog or a rat, but to be able to make a decision to become a firefighter and like make long-term plans, to set alarms, to push through the struggle, to execute these long-term plans, which involve a lot of overriding and struggling through temporary temptations and overcoming procrastination, et cetera, et cetera. That's our godliness. That's the sense in which God, so that's the sense in which we are like God. And so you can combine Kant with religion, just like you can combine the other two moral theories with religion, but none of them depend on the existence of God. And I think that the idea that ethics depends on the existence of God was pretty much put to bed by, as far back as Socrates in the Euthyphro. So the Euthyphro dilemma is, are things good because God commanded them, or did God command them because they're good? And if you go it seems like the obvious answer that basically all philosophers have thought is correct since Socrates is that God commanded them, if God exists, because they're good, which makes morality independent of God, and then he commands them because they're good. He didn't make them good through his commands.